All right, welcome back to the Nexus Podcast. Jay Catherine, a security architect for a major retailer, is my guest today. Jay has a really interesting career path that I want to cover with him as he got into cybersecurity, as well as talk about his day-to-day responsibilities and thoughts on OT security and risks related to logistics, which is obviously a huge concern for retailers. Before we bring in Jay, we're wrapping up 2025, obviously, and I cannot thank you enough for listening this year. Podcast has really grown, and I appreciate everyone who has subscribed and taken the time to listen to my guests. My guests, of course, are really the stars of this show, and the 29 episodes I did this year featured a really diverse set of experiences and job titles and people coming from many different companies. So sincerely, thank you to all of you who took the time to come on the podcast this year. It's genuinely appreciated. I know it takes some time out of your day to prep and so forth, so thank you so much. That said, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. We'll be picking right up after the holidays again, so I hope to see more and more of you out there listening. So with that, let's kick off today's episode and bring in Jay. How you doing? Good to see you.
How are you doing?
I'm all right. We're doing this, a week before Christmas, so kind of winding down for the year.
Yeah, it's a big time of the year, especially for us in the retail space.
I can't even imagine what, like, from Thanksgiving, well, I'm sure it starts before Thanksgiving for you guys, but right through the holidays must be just insanity.
Previously, we always talked about the year, and it's this holiday season. It's, a day is a week is a month compared to the rest of the year in sales. So there's definitely a lot of focus, and it's the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl.
Yeah. I mean, is it like all hands on deck, especially like leading up to Black Friday and throughout the season?
It really is. It's we go into a holiday freeze, as most retailers do, and no big developmental changes during that time frame, outside of planned events or planned changes. But it's definitely the time of the year when you're in retail.
I bet. So we don't know each other that well. We met a couple of times, but I'd like to always, with new folks, just talk about your career path a little bit. Because I think everybody has kind of a diverse a road that they take, and they end up in cybersecurity. Especially folks who have been around a while. They don't go to school for cybersecurity. They go to school for everything else and end up as a CISO or a developer, an engineer. Give me a little bit about, how you landed in cybersecurity.
Yeah, I went to school for communication, be a broadcaster. I wanted to do hockey play-by-play, and Mike Lang of the Pittsburgh Penguins was, my idol and a mentor at that time. I was fortunate to get to meet with him and learn from him, and that was my plan, right? And after school, I worked at an oldies radio station, WJPA in Pennsylvania, and WWVA in Wheeling, and the big 50,000 watt blowtorch KDK, the first radio station doing Pittsburgh Pirates and all kinds of different stuff, and with a minor league hockey team, all at the same time. And I couldn't afford to move out of my parents' house, right? So it was, while there's a lot of luxuries, free car washes, oil changes, concerts, it's also, you don't get paid a whole lot, but it's fun. But my program director at the time at the oldie station was, I was getting called in, right? This was the late 90s, internet boom, satellite radio starting to take over and things. And I'm always coming to fix stuff for him. And he's like, "What the hell are you doing here?" Right? So he said, "Go use that." And I was fortunate, right? I was in school at the internet boom, right? When I started in school, we were using browsers like Archie and Veronica and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, Netscape Navigator showed up on the scene, right? And wow, you can put images and some things like that.
Yeah.
So it was a good time. I started doing the college's websites and all those early on types of static things that you do in development.
Yeah.
It was a liberal
You're the IT guy.
It was a liberal arts school, right? So you have to take all the different disciplines. And when it came to math, I was like, "Oh, computer science 101. I'll take that as my math class." And then I looked and I'm like, well, to get a minor in computer science, you have to take 102, data structures and algorithms. There were like 4 or 5 classes.
Right.
So I took those to get the computer science minor. didn't know how valuable those 5 classes out of my whole education would have been to transition, and went to work for Fisher Scientific on the first e-commerce mall that we, that ever existed. It
Yeah.
was called procurenet.com. And, this is pre-credit cards on the internet, right? There's purchase orders cut for orders and things like that. And I was there for a year working on that stuff, and ended up getting
Where
a
you are.
call, coming out, and here I am now, 26 years later. And it's I've been all around the retail space in IT, and everything from, like we talked, the logistics space, e-commerce, stores, credit, production planning, production sourcing. Have supported all these different teams over the years, as a developer, and from the security side. So it's been quite a path.
It's funny. I come from a sports journalism background too. That's where I started, but on the newspaper side, not in broadcasting. But it obviously it helps you tell a story succinctly, and I'm sure in your role it helps you kind of communicate up and down the ladder, whether it's up to your bosses or all the way down to the help desk. I'm sure.
Yeah, it does. It definitely helps out. The confidence in speaking, the thoughtfulness of what you're going to portray and say, and that's been the key to my success, especially in the security architecture space, because I am dealing with operations folks on the floor in the distribution center, right, that are hourly.
Sure.
You're working with them all the way up through the management teams, the engineers, the IT staff, all the way up through your senior leadership, through your CISOs, CIOs, et cetera. And it's a different conversation with everybody you're talking to, right? Vendor, Absolutely. The same thing, right? What you tell on that side versus internally. And you kind of have to have that filter. Sometimes, sometimes you forget and you say something that, to somebody that in hindsight, you're like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have released that information. You hope it glossed through, but it is more how you carry yourself, right?
Right.
And making sure you can communicate to people on the right level.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes, I'm not going to use a lot of technical jargon when I'm talking to a senior leader, and the same thing when I'm talking to the floor operator.
Yeah.
That, you're going to try to keep it as simple and understandable as you can. And I think that's key, is not going and trying to, you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room, right? It's you just have to be the most confident, the most informative, and, and get people to make, because they're going to make their decisions, right? And you're just supplying data for them to make decisions, to make smart decisions.
So tell me a little bit about your day-to-day responsibilities, and I'm especially interested as to, how connectivity has kind of changed, what you're dealing with every day from a risk and security perspective.
Yeah, and so I own across our selling channels, payment systems, logistics space, call center, and all of those now you see different touch points. Originally when I started there, everything was internal, and I came in to make client applications, web applications, right? And they were still, but those web applications were still inside of our fortress. They were inside of our firewalls on our network, and then all of a sudden they start to get stored out in cloud space, be it just a data center, for example, right early on, right? And then when the cloud name came to the data centers, all of a sudden, it's so now you have to worry about when they're in your walls, what protections are on them, right? Because you applied them,
right.
Who can get to it, because you have to come through all the network controls just to be on the network to get to them, or physically in the building. So cloud was a big change for that. Then now things are out there. Pandemic was a big change because now the workers are out there. So it kind of just opened things up. And then these devices that used to be, a PLC, for example, in your distribution center was talking to a controller right there. And now we think about our house, right? And you've got a light switch on the wall or your thermostat. It's not talking to anything on your network. Even though you're using your phone that's on your network, it's calling home to a server in some cloud, server, right? And it's area,
Right.
and your phone is hitting that that same servers, and it's not talking phone to thermostat, right? So that protection layer of these devices now have to talk out, some of them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's you're at the mercy of the controls on that vendor that they have on their systems, as well as the control of the network path to and from, so someone doesn't jump on,
Right.
hijack that, use it to get in, etc. So that's really been the big change, is that the network grew, right? It grew from
Sure.
what you controlled in your walls coming through your switches to not just the data going, but the users are coming from all over. So
Mm-hmm.
that's been a big change.
You just mentioned, I know I want to talk about logistics and OT, but you just mentioned supply chain, the vendor relationships. Um, how, how much visibility do you have as an organization into what your partners are doing in terms of security? And, how much can you influence that relationship? It's like, I'd rather you guys do X instead of Y. I mean, what's that relationship like on a
Yeah,
security level?
the key is really a strong vendor security team, and they're doing those vendor security assessments up front. Those are more, how security thoughtful are these companies, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
really the implementation piece. So that's where it gets separated. So the vendor security assessment is looking at the companies. What are they doing? What data sources are they using? What technology are they using? But really, then it comes over to our security architects when we're doing implementations, because it's really, what is our solution using, right? It's one thing
Mm-hmm.
that company may be a full Microsoft shop for all of their internals, and they're running Defender, and they're running Sentinel, and they're running, the whole gambit of tools, or a whole Google shop, and et cetera. And, but then our solution that we're actually implementing with them may not be on those same controls.
Sure.
So there's something to be said for that you really have to make sure you have that two-pronged approach, that
Mm-hmm.
you don't want something on their side to put you at risk, which is a big key, right? If they have user infiltration gaps that someone can get into their systems easy, then they can get across. If they have their production systems air gapped from their corporate, that they're not
Right.
able to get to servers without a jump host or a service account,
Mm-hmm.
or those types of things. So there's some of that carries over to each other, but really we look at it two ways, right? We look at the company, and then we look at our solution implementation
Yeah.
with them. And there
And
is a lot of pushback. We are concerned with where our data is stored.
sure.
There's certain times you don't want it in obviously in a shared space, certain data. If you have trade secrets, you have customer list, customer data, all of that, PCI data, credit data. There's certain things you don't want to be in spaces where someone might walk across next door, right? And it's like, if it's a
Right.
shared environment, and you're sharing with a competitor, maybe not in your area, but a retail competitor, right? And they get your customer
Sure.
list, and all of a sudden they start marketing them, and that's there's also a lot of dirty business out there too, right? We see
Sure.
with different companies that not everybody's on the up and up, and the bottom line matters more than the ethics behind how you get to the bottom line sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So those things, you try to take that into account,
Yeah.
and advise changes where you can. And there have been times where we backed out of implementations with a partner because they could not do the things that we wanted them to do, or back
Right.
off of things. And that's the good thing, I guess, from our team, is we have that ability to do that, right? Size
Yeah.
matters. Sometimes it's the other way, right? And the retailer doesn't have the cards to play, and they have to go with something, or they don't have the
Mm-hmm.
funds. I remember years back, I went to interview for a CISO role, and one of my friends worked for the same company, and he said, "Yeah, you have all the money to do anything you want. You just have to tell them why my development team doesn't deserve that money." And it was like,
That's the way to go about it, huh?
it's a different perspective. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
right. It's not like all of us pulling the weight to do the right things. It's like, yeah, you can have these funds to do this if you can
Right.
tell me why this side doesn't need it,
Yeah.
and you're taking the money from the different teams, and it's a different perspective, right?
Hmm.
And it depends on your leadership of your companies and the size and income of your companies too, right? Like how security is portrayed in those.
Sure.
Um, a lot of times too, it comes down to the operations. That in retail, right? A sale is king, right? The whole reason
Everything.
we're here is really for the cash register to ring and for money to change hands, right? It's what it really comes down to. And
Yeah, you can't have any disruptions, whether it's coming from a third party or something else internal. Yeah.
and it's something too that we need to evaluate as far as from a security perspective.
Hmm.
If you're going to extend a transaction, how much time are you adding to that transaction for security's sake versus how many supplemental controls do you have in place
Sure.
that will prevent you from needing to have this particular control in place? Because
Hmm.
as you add to transaction time, you also add to basket drop or bag drop, whatever you're calling it on
Yeah.
your cart. And if you add 5 minutes, and that fifth person in line or maybe the 10th person in line is going to drop, and everyone after them, and then there's a multiplier, right, of how many registers, how many carts, what are the size of those. So then you start talking about losing the transaction. So there is that key as well on what your layers of security look like.
Let's talk about logistics because it's obviously crucial to your business. Um, what keeps you up at night about in terms of risks or threats? What are you prioritizing in terms of defending that whole logistics process?
Yeah, I think for most of us that are in any kind of OT environment, right, be it distribution, shipping, manufacturing, utilities, hospitals, right, where it all kind of have the same thought. It's disruption is the biggest
Yeah.
thing, because these areas, it's called operational technology for a reason, right? Because it's got to operate. It's
Sure.
um, some are worse as far as the repercussions, right? If a hospital gets closed down, lives are lost. If a utility gets shut down, lives can be lost, right? It's the same thing. Um, for distribution manufacturing, it might slow down things. There's money lost a lot of times, right? And we've seen that with large auto retailers or auto manufacturers who've recently had issues with operations going down, and you see
Yep.
the financial hit from that. So that's the biggest thing, is right, just that disruption of your business and recovery. And I think for me, my biggest fear, it's I feel confident in a lot of the controls that we put in place and the air gapping we do on our facilities, which I think is key for anybody, right? You want to make sure these facilities, you can't touch them from corporate space, right? You can't
Right.
touch them from the outside unless you have specific rules that you need to do that, like for vendor
Hmm.
support or something like that. And you really focus on making sure those doors and windows are locked, have the proper keys, all those
Sure.
types of things, right? And um, but my biggest fear is we have a control in place and there's alerting or monitoring, and there's no one listening on the other side of the line. That's
Uh-huh.
always my biggest fear, right? You see the trouble signs, and there's no response to it. I think that for folks in this space, I think that's why red teaming is so important, because these buildings don't shut down, right? They don't
Mhm.
stop. They're usually open 24/7, 365, and they're always operating. Your water pump is always going, right? Your electric lights are always on. The utilities,
Yeah.
the hospital's always open. The plant is always either storing product, pushing product, making product. Um, so there's not a lot of time to shut down and test things. So it's doing those red team exercises really show the controls that you have in place are working, right?
Yeah.
That's is someone getting alerted? We think about this OT space, right? And it's the same as your house. Like it's IoT, OT are really not much different. And these devices, they call them smart devices, but they're all dumb, right? What's your thermostat do? It turns on the heat or the cold when it's told
Right.
to, right? It's a switch. Your light switch turns the lights on or off. PLC might start a conveyor, stop a conveyor, push product to the left or to the right. They don't really think. They don't do a lot of compute on these devices,
Mm-hmm.
and that's why traditional scanning doesn't work with them, right? You ping it, and it's like, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to go to sleep, and then all of a sudden you just disrupted yourself, right? And so
Right.
now someone's got to go on maybe on a cherry picker out in your facility and go up to 50, 60 feet in the sky to restart a small device that just got shut down. So
Yeah.
you can't do like the traditional scanning. And that's another thing that I kind of lead into is knowing what's on your network is key, right? Because these environments, they're fixed environments, right? It's not like there's a PLC not walking out onto the floor every day.
Right.
These are getting installed, configured, and they have a communication path, and they follow that path, and they talk in that path, and under even down to the ports and the communication protocols, right? They do this one thing. So it's easier to lock them down, but it's also easier to monitor them because you have a normal, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a baseline of what does this look like.
Yeah.
Corporate environment, you can't do that because today my laptop's here, tomorrow it's there. I may be plugged in, I may be Wi-Fi, I might be hitting a server for application stuff. It's just you don't know what those devices are going to be doing, so it's
Right.
a lot different.
Yeah.
These, what that footprint looks like. You know what the footpath should look like, the data path, and you should be able to throw an alert and say, hey, why is this device trying to talk to the internet? Or why is the internet trying to talk to this device? Or why is this talking to each other? Why is this trying to rally the troops? Why is this robot trying to get all the robots to do something?
That's the nightmare.
Right? So that's the thing is just if nobody's watching that side of it,
Mm-hmm.
we know what they should be doing. Is someone getting alerted if they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Right.
That we can.
Yeah. I mean, there is a bit of set and forget kind of mentality with some of these devices, but if they're connected, then there's a chance for external access or whatever. And it's a lot of new dynamics that are being introduced there.
And when you think about it, right, it's not pretty. There's not a whole lot sexy about distribution. Right? It's like, and a lot of the attention goes to, the website, the e-commerce site, the marketing site, the product, just product manufacturing of what the next product is. In automotive, right, the design of the next car. What goes around with that, and like the shop floor that's building it, or the distribution center that's storing it at the warehouse, or the shipping buildings getting it out to the customers. It's not viewed all the time from the top down with the same layer of importance as, say, the e-commerce site would be.
Sure.
Where we talked about, right? That's where the money comes in. So that's the focus, and that's where customer data is, and that's where the credit data is, and that's where the product is, and that's where some kind of reward might be for someone. But in these last couple of years, we've started to see these attacks coming more in this space that it wasn't as sexy for the attackers before too. It's like, oh, we took a distribution center down, right? Like products still moving. There wasn't as much of a cash reward for them, a monetary reward for them to do that as now they've found ways, which that's all business evolves, right? Unfortunately, the bad guy business evolves as well as the good guy business. So
yeah. So the introduction of IoT into logistics and distribution, I'm sure, is huge. All those sensors and a lot of data moving around. How much of a headache is it to manage this stuff securely? Like what concerns you, and talk about some of kind of the mitigations or at least controls that work for you.
Yeah, automation is huge for everybody, right? It's can we cut costs? How can we automate? How can we protect people? Um, Boxes and things are heavy. and that's, you talk to most people in this area, right? That most of their financial risk is their associates, of paying, if they get injured and in that side, and
Yep.
loss of productivity. Now there's some of these tools that can really assist in that or replace, and your facility can run longer. So it's really great from that perspective, but it's also, a lot of these devices have to call home to something.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same thing. You put a robot on the floor to do something, and it doesn't really do its own compute. It's not really a robot like we think, like a, doing
Right.
its work in you think of Star Wars droids and things, right? It's not like that. It's a device that is doing something, picking up, putting down, moving, but it still has to get an order from somewhere, and it still has to get a call to do that. So really, it's making sure you have the right controls on those communication paths, that it's only getting the calls that it should be getting. And the same thing, these manufacturers are great, and vendors, as far as what they're providing. These devices are going to be getting calls from here. They're going to be coming on these ports. They're becoming on these protocols. It's going to get whatever it gets, a packet, an API, whatever. It's defined, right? As long as you're defined, and it's not, we don't know what tomorrow is going to look like for it. That's when you start to get in trouble, and that, you really need to have better eyes on it.
Yeah.
But, as long as
it sounds like, I was going to say, sorry to interrupt, but just from a monitoring perspective, it sounds like that there's always been a baseline that doesn't deviate much, and that might be changing from a monitoring perspective. Is that fair to say?
Yep. And with that, you have to think about what you put on what network, right?
Yeah.
Layers of network is important too in this space, that you can't have everything on. You can't have one corporate network that does everything, right? That does your compute, that does your OT. Even in the OT space, you have different things that do different things. You got to keep them separated.
Right.
You can't have that noise or that risk of, we put a robot here that does this. He pushes a button on the. We'll keep it simple, right? He pushes a button to make the conveyor start and stop. It's a robot that does it, instead of we're sending the command, we'll say. And we don't want that robot, though, to be able to talk to other things on there, because he's getting a command from somewhere else, and now all of a sudden you just build a pathway into your network, and you want to keep it air gapped. You want to keep the controls in place, that it's isolated, and that he's isolated from the other devices on there, and he's isolated from the other vendor's robot that's sitting next to him doing something.
Right.
I think that's the key with anything in the OT space, is isolation of things that are different.
Mm-hmm.
Things that don't need to talk to each other shouldn't be able to talk to each other.
Right.
And it's hard sometimes, right? And it comes down to dollars. It comes down to hardware, and folks that know their space on the network, on the Wi-Fi, on VPNs, on B2B networks, B2B connectivity, all those different things. It takes folks that know their stuff to be able to set it up properly, which you don't always get, because some of these shops, you have one network guy. It's depending on size and scale of, you've got a guy and he's been doing it for years.
Yeah.
And he knows how it was done in 1990, and it's the best way.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not, we're many, many years removed from that, but it's, the technology continues to evolve, and we talked in other conversations, right? It's, there was the web, there was client applications becoming web applications,
right?
Applications going to the cloud. There were cloud turned into mobile. Now it's AI. It's just another piece of the path of technology. And it's, if you don't stay on top of it, you don't know what you need to protect or how you need to protect it, that can become a liability as well. So continual education and curiosity is another thing that, as practitioners, we need to stay on top of.
Yeah. So you mentioned air gapped a couple of times. I assume you mean just segmenting via the network and just kind of isolating these, because air gaps gone from like traditional
Yeah, yeah,
air gaps, but like segmentation is not easy, and you hinted at that. It's just
yeah,
you really need to know what you're doing, otherwise you can be your own disruptor, and that's a bad thing.
yeah, and even connectivity to a network, right? Um,
Sure.
you logging in with your account, that's a risk,
Hmm.
right? Versus having a service account that there are controls around that you can't just accidentally wander into the wrong network because you have an ID that has all these permissions, right?
Right.
Not only are you a risk, someone that gets your credentials is a risk, right?
Hmm.
It's and we've got layers of, you know, identity management is amazing now. The layers of controls that we can put on an individual now, where it used to be, I had an ID and a password, right?
Right.
And that was it. And um, you don't happen upon it and accidentally flip a switch, and someone doesn't have your credential and accidentally come upon it. That you have true accounts to do things that need to be done. Um, it protects you, it protects the company, it protects the assets. It's just so important to make sure you have that separation of duty
Sure.
and separation of accounts for doing different things.
Hmm. All right. So as we wrap up, let me just ask you just a couple of best practices that you can share, especially around kind of the logistics and locking that down, whether it's in your industry or others that kind of deal with this.
Yeah, I think like we mentioned when we just talked about two of them there with the separation of the network,
Sure.
isolating these things and having them run on their own. Even at home, I run an IoT VPN or excuse me, a VLAN, IoT VLAN here, just to keep my smart devices separate from everything else, right? Because I know they're only talking to the internet. They can't talk to each other.
Right.
You talk out to home and they can't do it. It's the same thing there, right? You got to keep it separated. You got to have controls for user identities. Another big thing is passive scanning, because as we mentioned, traditional scanners, IT scanners don't really work in this environment. They cause your own disruption. You want passive scanning because you got to know what's on your network. That's
Hmm.
is knowing a new device just showed up, and you reach out to your operations team and they say, oh yeah, we're in the process of installing that. Which happens, right? Sometimes it's
Sure.
a break fix, sometimes something came in as a test, whatever. But knowing what's on the network and knowing its communication paths, so that passive scanning will give you that. You know that A is talking to B and A shouldn't be talking to C.
Yeah.
Right. And that A exists. So those are the big ones right there, right? And then on top of that is red teaming your environment to make sure your controls are working, because it's one thing to put them there. It's one thing to say we have alerts in place and we have eyes on it and monitoring and the logging and everything, but it's another thing to be able to act on that.
Yeah.
That it's useful, that it's
Hmm.
working, that what you set up 5 years ago, which all of a sudden 5 years passed by and whoa, did that really happen? It's like,
Yeah.
that that the stuff from 5 years ago is still working. So
Right.
that's another thing and it gives you something too when you go to your leadership and they say we've got to distribute funds. Are we going to distribute to OT security, or are we going to distribute to e-commerce? You can fight for those dollars because you can prove that what you're
Sure.
doing and what you're protecting is working.
Yeah.
So
I'm glad you said act on those red team reports, because I've heard so many times from guys that do red teamings, they'll produce this report that's 2-3 inches thick, and they'll come back in a year or 2 years, and it's the same crap is still going on, the same exposures and the same whatever, and just they paid all that money and didn't do anything about it. So, all right, Jay, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I enjoyed it.
All righty, have a great holiday season, you and the family.
You as well.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.